Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Gift of the Struggle. I'm Elizabeth Denham, your host, and I am here with a very special guest this episode. We're talking to RaeAnne Thayne, who many of you might know as a New York Times bestselling author. Her heartwarming novels have touched millions of readers around the world. With over 70 books to her name, she's built a beloved career creating stories of hope, healing, and second chances. But beyond the page, RaeAnne has faced one of life's most profound challenges and blessings. As the mother of an adult son with severe disabilities, um, she's going to share with us how this journey has shaped her, the joy her son brings to their family, and the powerful life lessons that she's gained along the way. RaeAnne has often said she wishes everybody could parent him for just one day to experience the perspective, grace, and unconditional love that he inspires. So, RaeAnne, welcome to The Gift of the Struggle.
Thanks so much. I'm excited to talk to you.
I am too. I mean, we've done interviews about your books and your professional life. But I wanted to talk to you today because I think your story is very inspiring, and I think it shows the world and people who may be in the beginning of a struggle, that there's so much joy still to be had. So first, what is your son's name?
His name is Avery. On social media, I call him Captain Awesome. So lots of
Captain.
readers may know him as Captain Awesome, but his name is Avery.
And you have two other children as well,
I
correct?
do. We have an older daughter. She was 7 when we had him, and then our youngest one came 6 years later. So they're very spread out. We feel like we kind of have 3 only children in a lot of ways because they were so spread
Yeah,
out.
you started over every time.
Yeah, every time it was like brand new.
That's funny. Mine are all right up together, so it was all the same phases at all the same times. I don't know which one is harder or easier, but
We
you land
laughed
where you land,
because
right?
our daughter started college the year our youngest started kindergarten. So we were kind of, both ends of the spectrum there.
Yeah, it goes on and on and on, I guess. So as we do on this show, we talk a little bit about the struggle to begin with. So give us a little bit of the backstory. So Avery has severe disabilities. He's had them since birth,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. So he was born with IUGR, they call it interuterine growth retardation was the word they used. I think they probably have changed it since then, but basically just meant he was not as big as he should have been at birth. He was only 3 weeks early, but only weighed 4 pounds. It was an emergency delivery. They knew, I knew he was in distress. They knew as soon as things started to happen that he was in distress. So they took him very quickly, like within an hour of me getting to the hospital. And he struggled. He was in the NICU for 3 weeks. We brought him home with a feeding tube, but that was really all. They said that he'd experienced a brain bleed. I had a lot of things with the pregnancy that we didn't know were going on. I had some high blood pressure, also had I had medical care, but there were kind of things that were missed along the way. They think he stopped growing about 3 weeks before he was born. He had some incident, some assault that happened to him 3 weeks before, and I think I had a uterine tear, and I think that was causing some of the problems. So we don't really know. We did all kinds of genetic testing and everything afterward, but they told us everything would be fine. It's a minor bleed, brain bleed. It should be okay, after the NICU. And he seemed like the biggest, healthiest kid in there, because by the time we left, I think he was 5 pounds, and you have all these little teeny micro preemies that were in there. But we kind of figured out quite quickly that was not going to be the case. He cried constantly, probably for his first 2 years. He just cried. It was so overstimulating. The world was just so overstimulating for his neural system that he just couldn't handle it. And he started having seizures when he was about 3. He's been on a feeding tube since he was 3. So now he's 28. He turned 28 a few weeks ago, and he is nonverbal. He's non-mobile. He has low vision to no vision because he had some eye problems, and then now they kind of think the brain is not really communicating with his eyes very well. But he's very social. He's very interactive. He understands things. smiles. We don't know exactly where he is developmentally, but he does respond and smile, and likes when you speak Spanish to him. He likes lots of different things, and he's has a very big personality for somebody who can't speak. And lots of people love him because he has a big smile, and everywhere we go, people love him. And so, and it was I had sold my fifth book the week that I had him, like a few days before. So I was already kind of having my career starting in writing novels. And so our plan had been, I was working as a newspaper editor at the time, newspaper editor and reporter. And our plan had been, I was going to quit when I had him and just write full time because my career was kind of on the way. I'm so grateful that we had those things in place already, because I could not have held a full-time job with this baby who cried all the time. We couldn't have put him in daycare. I mean, he slept in my arms basically for that first 18 months, I think, of his life, because we put him in his bed and he'd wake up and he'd start all over again crying. So I just would sleep in the chair and hold him, and he would sleep. And so I'm really grateful that we had those things in place. I feel like, there were reasons that all those things happened before we had him, that we were sort of, being prepared in some way to have him in our life.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the mental transition from you've had a healthy, typical child first. She's, what'd you say, 7 when you had him?
She was 7 when we had him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say she was a very precocious child too. She was very extremely smart for her age, verbal from the time she was probably 3, having full conversations, and just extremely smart. And then suddenly we had a totally different paradigm shift to something
Yeah.
where we weren't quite sure what was happening. And I will say it didn't happen all at once. Obviously, there's some stress at first when he was in the NICU, and we knew, things weren't quite what we had expected, but they all assured us everything would be fine. It was minor bleed, you'll take him home. And we know lots of kids who you don't ever see any result from it. But we kind of knew by the time he was a year that was not going to be the case, not only because of the crying, but, he wasn't sitting up. He wasn't really reaching for things. He was missing milestone after milestone. And so when he was about a year, I remember at that time we kind of knew he was going to have cerebral palsy. And so I said at his 1-year checkup to his doctor, nobody's ever said this, but is he going to have cerebral palsy? Does he have cerebral palsy? And the doctor said, yeah, probably, because, they
Yeah.
can't really diagnose at that point, because they have to make sure, see where they're missing. But because he had been in the intensive care unit as a newborn, they had quite extensive follow-up clinics. I think we went about every month or two, and we saw all the specialists. So they were really following him quite closely to make sure that they were on track of everything. And that was kind of, we figured out at 10 months old that he had cataracts. So he wasn't seeing, and we thought, well, we'll get the cataracts fixed, and then he'll start reaching for things and start hitting a few more of those developmental milestones. So he had his little glasses, and he still really wasn't reaching for things. And so kind of changes along the way. In the beginning, things were much easier to deal with. He was smaller, we could lift him, we could carry him, and
Mhm.
then just as life goes on, certain things become harder. He stops being able to do certain things. We had certain treatments along the way that some have helped and some have not helped, and some have backtracked him, and then the seizures have had an impact on his life too. And so we've just sort of had to adjust to different things along the way. So I can't, when you say, how do you adjust to that mind shift, it really has sort of been gradual through the years. We have 28
Yeah.
years, and it's still 28 years we've had to deal with it. And I would say we're doing well overall, but there are still times when you just think, this is much too much for me to deal with right now,
Yeah.
but you just,
Well, in terms of the mind shift too that I'm thinking of, where do you go from thinking, okay, this is a minor brain bleed, he's going to catch up, he's going to start meeting milestones, things are going to get better. There's this hope for improvement or transition into something that's what we would refer to as more normal, um, to realizing that that's not the case, and you've got to shift and adjust your expectations for what his life holds for him. Is there a moment? I imagine that's gradual too, but was there a moment where you kind of thought, okay,
I couldn't pinpoint one specific moment. I can pinpoint lots of tiny moments, as he grew older, and the people that I had friends that had babies at the same time, and I could see their kids doing all these things that our son was not doing. And I knew from our older child what he should have been doing. We could sort of get that. But really all through his life, we did extensive therapies for his first, I want to say 10 or 12 years, where we were going 3 times a week to physical therapy. It was just constant therapy, at least, well, I'd say at least twice a week for physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. So all those things, we kept thinking, okay, we get over this and everything will work out. We make progress here and everything will work out. And then we got to some point where we just kind of said, this is not helping his quality of life right now at all. We're spending our whole life on the road going to appointments, and he's not having the chance to, to go to school and all the things that we wanted him to do. And so it really is a gradual process. And I would say, by the time he was about 6 or 7, and we knew he wasn't going to walk. He got his first wheelchair, I think, when he was 4. And we knew that needed to happen. Maybe 5, I think. We were using a stroller before then. And then when he was 5, we got a wheelchair. So we kind of figured that out. But we kept that hope. We had standards we would put him in. We would all the things with therapy that we would do to sort of try to give him the best possible chance that we could. And I have no regrets about that, because I feel like we worked as hard as we could. Sorry, I knew I was going to get
Yeah,
emotional.
that's okay. I mean, I completely understand. And so one of the things I think as a parent, just to give you a moment to breathe, I think one thing we all do is the best we can with the information we have in the moment that we have it. And you can't ever second guess or regret what you knew at the time.
Right.
And I think that whether it's parenting a teenager, a teenager who's just being a teenager, or a child who has some issues, you make decisions based on the information that you have in the moment that you have it. And so
Right.
I think that belief, internal belief, for me, having had a child who dealt with epilepsy for 10 years, and the other things in life that every parent deals with, you have to really believe those things,
Mhm.
and know that that's the best you can do in the moment that you have with the information that you have, and it's the right thing to do because that's what that's what you knew at that moment. And so looking back on that, I mean, you've got to have thought, we did everything we knew how to do. And then there's a point where you think, okay, now we're going to make a shift because his quality of life we've got to have a life that's
Right.
outside of all of the treatments and all of the therapies, right? Is that kind of where you
I think
shifted?
that's exactly where it was, and probably the most marked shift there was he used to he wore glasses for till he was about 5 or 6,
Mhm.
actually maybe 7. He would pull them off all the time. He would never keep them on, and then we switched to contact lenses, and we wore those for 9 years. I put contact lenses in every single day, thinking this is going to make a difference. We're helping his vision.
Mhm.
He did not really have functional vision, and at some point I said, why am I putting him through this? Every time we need to run down to the doctor, get new contact lenses. They were extremely expensive. We had to pay for them out of pocket, and we're just like, they're not really helping. Why are we putting him through this? He hated me putting him in. He hated me taking him out. He would lose him all the time. And
Yeah,
so I just said, I'm not going to put him through this anymore. There's no point in it when he's not showing functional vision at this point. He
yeah,
can still see close up, and if whatever vision he has, he can still see faces and things like that. But it's not like he's driving a car. It's not like he's
yeah.
going to do any of those things. And so it just felt like the right decision. And there have been a few small things along the way there. I think a lot of it also was having our third child, because he was born
Mhm.
when Avery was 6, and at that point Avery was in the school system. We were doing
Mhm.
a lot of those therapies at school now. And when he was in during the school day, he was having the physical therapy and the occupational therapy and things like that. And so we kind of felt like, okay, we'll take this huge leap and have another child, even though they don't know what happened with Avery. They probably never will. And we don't know, we did all the genetic testing. There might be some genetic, issue
Yeah.
we're not aware of. So we made that big jump to have another child. And then having our son, our youngest one, was really a big change for our whole family. He was such a joy, such a delight, Avery was so thrilled to have him and loved him from the minute we put Noah in his arms, and it
Mhm.
was that really sort of just said, we've got other things we can focus on exclusively on this caregiving, which we do, but we have other children that need us as well. So we had to
Right.
focus on that as well.
So I have kind of two follow-ups to that. One was, how nerve-wracking was it with the third during the pregnancy and the
Very.
delivery? It's got to be terrifying until the moment that you
It
see him
was
and
it was really scary. And it was, he had certain markers where they thought he might have Down syndrome. And so they were, we had to do some of the intensive ultrasounds and things like that. And they wanted to do the amniocentesis. And I just said, no, we've dealt with CP. If he's got Down syndrome, we'll deal with that. But we didn't know really until he was
Yeah.
born. And he didn't have that, and so he had some ADHD. So we had those issues to deal with as well. But it was very nerve-wracking, but I will never question that decision, because it was, like I said, he was such a joy in our life, and it was exactly what we needed. It just brought so much light and life to our family that we really needed at that point.
Yeah. And do you find that it shifted your perspective? So I'll give you another minute to breathe. Um, in my personal life, I had a, child with seizure disorder. It started at age 2. And one thing that did that's what launched this Gift of the Struggle podcast, because I learned a lot of things that you can go through these struggles. The gift of that in one of the ways was perspective for me. I learned really quickly what was important. I learned what to let go of. Um, I learned that I could deal with a lot more than I thought I could. I learned that even if it wasn't what I had hoped or wanted for him, we could still find, good things in life. So did you find that having Avery did that, but also bringing a third child into this dynamic shifted the perspective a little bit? Because, like you said, you have other things that need to be done and other children that need your attention. And so, how was the balance of that in the beginning? I'm sure when you had Avery, the focus on the oldest might have felt frustrating, like maybe that's you don't have enough.
Right. We did feel that, but I'm fortunate that my husband is very involved with our children, and so he was able
Mhm.
to do a lot of things with her. Take her to the school things, and when I was having to be in the hospital with our son, we juggled it, and we tried really hard to make sure that she felt like she was extremely important, as important as Avery, and that we loved her and wanted the best for her, and we weren't comparing the two of
Yeah.
them. And even though his needs were more obvious and more apparent every single minute, we still tried to do our best for her. When Noah came along, it was sort of the same thing. We just really tried to say, this is our family now, this is what it is. It's maybe not what we planned. It absolutely is
Mhm.
not what we thought would happen, but it is what it
Mhm.
is. And overall, I think it's been, having a sibling with severe disabilities has been good for both of our children. Our oldest daughter
Mhm.
teaches, she's a special ed teacher because she has no problems dealing with anybody who has all, any other kind of neurodivergent issues, and because she's
Right.
lived that her whole life, and she has so much
Mhm.
compassion, deep compassion for people. And we really always kind of felt like we can't let our life stop because of this. So we've traveled all over the place with our kids. It's extremely hard to take Avery on trips. We just finished a cruise with him, and it's not an easy task, but we've always felt like this is our family. If we want to make these memories, we just have to deal with the hard part that comes along with it, because it's important. We go to Disneyland a lot, we go to Disney World, we love all that together, and that's something that he likes and that the other kids like. So we've just sort of had to find things that fit for everyone. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I
Yeah, it does. And then I want to talk about one more little hard part, which is, so actually two. One is I feel like there's a shift from, like you said, you're doing all the therapy, you're running to all the appointments, and the quality of life seems like, why am I putting contacts in when this is not going to make a difference in his quality of life? So how does your brain shift from that constant, because I think a lot of parents feel this way. We're just going to bulldoze our way through every therapy and every medication and every possibility to improve his situation. And then there's a time of acceptance where you think, I'm putting these contacts in is doing nothing for anybody.
right.
So how does your brain wrap around that little bit of a shift in perspective? Because at some point you're probably, and I think probably a lot of parents have dealt with this, feel like you're beating your head against the wall, but should I keep going? Should I not? What is the best decision? Tell us a little bit about how you land on that.
I don't know that there's any one answer to that. I think it's situational. So there were a lot of things that we just sort of had to say, enough with this now. Let's, and some of that came from him. We had other issues to deal with that became much more important. There were lots of times, like with the contact lenses, he was dealing with some life-threatening things at the time too. And so that was our focus. He had, a lot of pneumonias, he had a lot of lung issues, and we just said, let's push the things that aren't really mattering right now, focus on keeping him alive. And so for a lot of
Right.
life, that's kind of felt like, getting through the next illness, getting through the next thing, just doing the best we can for him, at every situation. And as I said, it changes because he changes. It's interesting. In some situations you think, well, you have a child with disabilities and it's a static situation because it is what it is with that child. But in his particular case, he's medically fragile as well. He has a J tube. And so there's always
Yeah.
a health component too, that sort of that overrides anything else, that we wanted to do when we're trying to keep him with us, because,
Right. Well,
we,
he's at risk for infection, I would imagine,
yeah.
more than the average person and all those types of things when you have things that are in your body.
Right. And about 3 years ago, he was diagnosed with neurogenic bladder, so he wasn't urinating like he needed to. So now we have to cath him. So that introduces UTIs, which we never dealt with before. So that's kind of become a huge part of our life now, is
Yeah, I'd imagine.
constant UTIs and kidney stones and lots of things like that were never an issue before. So it really
Yeah.
is. It's not a static situation. It's a constantly
Well,
evolving
and then
situation.
yeah, and figuring out what he's struggling with because he can't talk to you. I mean, does that adds a whole nother layer?
Yeah. Yeah, he
Yeah.
had a broken hip last year and we didn't know what was wrong. We took him to the ER 3 times and they ran every test and they're like, we don't know. And I took him and I said, X-ray his hips. It just seems like every time I move him, he's uncomfortable. And we thought
Yeah.
we had a little bed sore. We thought it might be that, but it was beyond that reaction. So they finally X-rayed him and they said, yeah, he's got a hip fracture that we don't know how. It might have been a bad transfer, might have been, just sometimes he hits his legs in the doorway as we're going through. It could have just been that. We have no idea how, but it
Yeah.
was a new situation we had to deal with last year. So it's kind of constantly evolving. And we've,
Yeah.
there have been times when we've just said, this is too much. We can't do this. But he's your child. He's our child. What do
Hmm.
we do? We have no choice. We caregive. We love him, and we'll take him to the ER 3 times in a month and pound the doctors until they figure it
Well,
out.
they listen.
We know
Yeah.
something. We know him better than anybody. It would say something's wrong, and even if it doesn't show up in the test that you're running, we know something's wrong. So dig
Yeah.
deeper.
Exactly. Always believe the mama.
Yep. Right. Exactly.
And so I think this will be my last harder question, then we'll move into the gifts. Um, Having a cousin who has adult children with disabilities, one of their concerns is one of the things they've had to accept is they will never have the empty nest. They will
Mhm.
always be caregivers. And then what will happen when they're not there to care for them? And I think that's such a common process to go through for people who are caregivers for their adult children. So, how have you, I don't know if reconcile is the right word, but maybe um, reconcile that? And do you get time with just you and your husband? Do you have help to come in? And how do you shift the perspective of what the rest of your life looks like?
That has been a tough change as well, and a tough thought. It starting when really probably when he hit about 16 and he started thinking about getting out of the school system. He
Mhm.
basically went to the high school until he was 22, because they have post high for people with disabilities until they're 22. But they felt like the high school was the best place for him because he was so social and he loved to go to football games and all that stuff. And so we felt like the high school was the best for him. But he did have to transition. He transitioned out of the school district pre-COVID. And so it was like
Mhm.
it was fall of right before COVID hit. And so we had all that to deal with, him here 24/7. And that really gave us, for a year and a half, no, for 2.5 years, we had him just home with us, because his program, that the adult days, he goes to an adult day program now, which is a wonderful program for people with disabilities. We love it. We would be sunk without it, because I wouldn't be able to do this podcast because he'd be upstairs, needing me.
Right.
And but he couldn't go for like 2.5 years post COVID. And so he was just 24/7 with my husband and I. We really got a kind of a firsthand view of what it would be like to do this without supports. And so we think about it a lot. We set things up in place so that, if we pass before he does, which we kind of never expected, we always, everyone told us he's medically fragile, be prepared that
Hmm.
he won't outlive you, but
Right. Yeah.
hey now, and he has a lot of medical problems still, but he's overall very healthy. And so again, I get emotional.
Yeah.
We've set things up so that he gets the bulk of our estate when we're gone. Our
Mhm.
other kids understand that they have to share a small part, but the rest of it's to take care of him, so that that burden is not on them. I don't expect them
Right.
to have to care for him because they couldn't do it. They honestly couldn't do it. And so we
Yeah.
expect he will have to go into a home at some point, and we've done a little research on that for when that day comes, where he would go if it ever came. But again, it's just you deal with what comes along, and it's not
Mhm.
everything that happens you just think I can't take more, but you also have the skills to handle that because of what you've been through before. And so
Mhm.
it's not like going from 0 to 60 in these decision makings. It's going from 55 to 60, if that makes sense.
Right.
You're not having to
Yeah.
we've had 28 years to adjust to the fact that this is not maybe the future that we planned. And certainly there are times that where I feel resentful sometimes. I would love to travel
Hmm.
more than I do, but we do get the opportunity. My husband and I have had really great caregivers in the past that have been able to stay with him. We've been able to go to Italy together, to Morocco, to Spain, to we went to Colombia one time, and we've had chances, not as often as I'd like, not as you know even a weekend away sometimes I think would be really nice,
Yeah.
but he's so medically fragile now, and things are so much more complicated now with his health that it's really hard. It's not like it was before when you could just say, you have to learn how to feed him, but then get him on the bus and he'll be fine, for the day. But things are a lot more complicated now, especially with the constant UTIs, and he's on IV antibiotics a lot. And so we just like, I've had to cancel lots of things, lots of trips we've had to cancel because we've planned things, and he's been ill. When he broke his hip last year, we're supposed to go on a cruise right after, and he broke his hip and he couldn't. So our kids had to, we had to cancel for our kids, and that was tough on them, but we did it this year instead, so we learned how to
Yeah.
adapt.
So starting to make a shift into the parts of the gifts. When you start feeling those things, the wish for something different, or the wish for a respite, or the resentment that might come up, which I think is incredibly normal. And I think it's brave of you to say that, because a lot of people don't want to admit it, but it's a completely normal human emotion. How have you learned to get through those moments? Because I'm sure you've had them a lot of different times over 28 years. What strength and coping skills have you learned to move into the next phase and get yourself kind of out of that?
The probably the main thing is, my husband and I are very close, and so we talk things out. And certainly I have breakdowns, and he sometimes has breakdowns, and we struggle with that. And you just find things that ease the tension. For me, it's taking a walk. I have a little dog, and having her has been a great joy too, because even though she's one more creature I have to take care of, she's just full of joy. And so I like taking her on walks. That's a big thing. I read scripture, read, inspirational things, listen to other people tell their stories. That's always very helpful to me. I sort of try to keep a bigger perspective and just say, we have done the best for our child, and we can't ask for more than that of ourselves. Yes, like we were talking earlier, certainly there are things maybe that I would have tried to do differently, but we know that we've given him a very good life. We've taken him lots of places. We've exposed him to lots of things. We are very concerned about making sure that he's out in the community, that he is able to do things with other people, that he has friends, which he absolutely does. And it's again one of those things, you deal with the situation as it comes. And sometimes it just, my husband and I taking a drive, when he had his broken hip, he was very unhappy and we couldn't figure out why. And we would just get in the car and go, and he'd be okay for a while. And as soon as we knew he wasn't, we'd head back home, So
Yeah.
you just sort of figure out coping mechanisms along the way, and that will look differently for other people in other situations. It really does
Hmm.
kind of depends. And what we've worked out works well for us. My husband, because my writing career was going very well, my husband left his full-time job. He was a magazine editor at our alumni newspaper at our alma mater, and worked in the development office there. And he left that in 2017, I want to say. And so
Hmm.
he's been a big help on the home front. During COVID, I could not have made it through that. I couldn't. I mean, I've had deadlines along the way. I've written 70 books through
Yeah.
uh, since he was born. I guess I have written 70 books, because I'm more than that, because I'm on my 77th book, and I'd written four when we had him. And so I've had deadlines along the way and had to keep a career going and have publisher responsibilities. And sometimes they want to send me on book tours and things like that. And so we could not have done that without the ability that we've had to make it work on my writing income alone, which has been such a blessing for us.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that because I think a lot of people who go through these types of things, and I think at different times of your life, you're capable of different levels of productivity, you know. So the fact that you have been able to carve out this, I mean, clearly with the support of your husband who was able to leave his job, but the fact is you still, throughout all of this personal struggle, forged a really successful career for yourself. So what did that teach you about yourself that you wouldn't have otherwise known?
Well, let me backtrack and say I'm not sure that I would have created that successful career had we not had our son, because
Interesting.
that changed my perspective as a person. And I think my writing certainly changed. I became much more aware of the importance of community and the importance of going on and finding joy even when life is really, really hard, because we did that in our own life, and we've had, lots of experience with that. And it was those books that I started to write that were about community and about people having struggles that I think started to resonate with readers. And that's really when my career took off. So I'm not sure. I mean, I still would have had probably a pretty good career, because I was writing, before we kind of knew where we were going to be with him. I was still writing. I was doing writing, books that I was happy with, but I will say my writing shifted too. I was writing romantic
Mhm.
suspense books. And then I got to where I was realizing I loved these communities so much more. And I loved writing about families helping each other because of our own experience. And so that's sort of when my writing started to shift. And so that was, that really did help me. And when, let me backtrack also, when you asked about coping mechanisms, having
Mhm.
those deadlines was a huge coping mechanism for me, because I had to focus on something else, and I had something else to keep me going. It wasn't all about our son all the time, because I had books coming out all the time, and I would hit bestseller lists, which was exciting. And I had things on a personal side that helped. And I tell people who are in this situation, see what you can do about developing yourself and finding something that brings you joy and satisfaction and contentment, and pursue that as well. And it's not always easy. And I know that we were in a very lucky position in the fact that we had planted those seeds prior to his birth, and some of them had come. I'd worked really hard to sell books, and for 5 years before he was born, and then we had him, and and I was already kind of there. And so I just kind of feel like things worked out the way they needed to, and the writing did keep me sane in a lot of ways. Hearing from readers, and hearing from, my getting having publisher input, and having a publisher that was really behind me and pushing me, was really helpful. And they've also really, my publisher has been very understanding throughout these years. I've missed deadlines because sometimes
Mhm.
we're in the hospital and I can't help it. We've had
Yeah,
situations come up, and my publisher's been really good about that.
that is great. And I think one of the mantras I've adopted over the years is embracing your own reality.
Mhm.
And instead of going around these things, like you talk about taking a drive or going for a walk and working your feelings through it instead of tamping it down and avoiding it. I feel like that is a really helpful skill in some of these things because if you don't feel the feelings and if you don't admit that you're struggling, it almost is like you're digging your own hole. But
Right.
having these other things that you can broaden the prism through which you view your life, it's not just on this one particular thing, which I think a lot of us can become myopic when
Right.
we are caring for, are going through a specific struggle, especially caregiving type things, because you feel like that's what you should be doing.
Right.
Um, but allowing yourself to have this broader prism of experiences, um, how do you think that helped him?
I think it was good for him to have, his parents not be completely focused on him all the time, and he would not let other people be with him for the first probably 5 years of his life. And
Mhm.
then gradually, he went to school, he had to go. I sat with him in his first special needs preschool for a while because he cried. He didn't like other people around him. And we did some therapies that were really helpful, some alternate therapies that I think really did broaden that for him, which we would not have done had I not, been at the point where I got deadlines. I've got to figure something out to let other people be
Yeah,
with him. Now he's extremely social. He loves everyone. That's been a big shift for him. He loves talking. I push him into his day program, um, and everyone just is so excited to see him and greets him, and he just lights up. And so that's been really good for him. And every kid needs to know that their parents have other things in their life. They're not the center of the universe all the time, and I think that's been helpful for
yeah,
him.
that's true for every single child, right?
Right, right. And I will say also, one of the ways I would say that I've dealt with it and come to terms with things, going back to earlier parts of our conversation, I have thrown that into the writing, and I think that's been cathartic for me. I have grieved through things by having my characters grieve through similar things, not the same. But I can remember quite early on, I wrote a book, where it was the first book I'd written where the heroine had lost a child, and her child had died in a tragic situation. And writing her grieving for her child was in a lot of ways me grieving for the future that we had planned for our child.
Right.
And I could say I have written a lot of books about people with disabilities, trying to sort of raise awareness about the world of disabilities, how hard it is in a wheelchair to get through, to have a house that doesn't work for you, and things like that. And there have been a lot of things that I've tried to incorporate in my writing that I hope have helped and made a difference to other people. And I sort of maybe through my social media as well, I'm quite open about some of my struggles on social media. And I think my readers, every time I post about him, I get like 20 times the response for anything else
Yeah.
that I post, because my readers love him. They send
Mhm.
presents to him. They send cards. Last year when he broke his hip, he got like probably 100 get well cards in the mail. They love him because he
He,
lights up a room. He's bright
yeah,
faced and he's
he's a
smart.
little mini celebrity.
He's a little celebrity. We say that I take him over to the grocery store, and we live in not a huge town. It's bigger than it was when we moved here, but people stop to talk to him because they know him from the years he was in school, and people that went to
Mm.
school with him will stop to talk to him, and things like that. And so it's really joyful to see that.
So let's talk about the siblings for a minute. What gifts has Avery given to the siblings in terms of how it has shaped who they are? You talked a little bit about your daughter being a special needs teacher, but one of the things that launched this podcast for me was that my children, so my son was 2 when he started having seizures, and then my other was one 4 and 6. And they became empathetic so young. They
Mhm.
thought outside of themselves way before little boys do. And so that's one of the ways that I have seen that experience shape who they've become, because it's become a part of who they are. So what kinds of things have your children learned from this experience that you think they wouldn't have learned without a brother like Avery?
I think that compassion and empathy is the big one. They're more aware of other people with special needs, not necessarily the overt ones like our child has, but even some of
Mhm.
the more hidden ones. Our daughter is so full of compassion for everyone, and I love that about her. Our son, our youngest, he was a peer tutor in high school because he loved being in that community. So the peer tutors were basically the children without disabilities who would come into the classroom and help the children with disabilities, take them to their regular classes and things like that. And he loved doing that because of his brother. As far as other gifts, I think, a more of an awareness that not everyone that everybody's dealing with something hard. I think that has been a good gift for them to learn that, seems like sometimes children and teenagers, they become very self-focused,
Mhm.
and but our children have always been able to look outside themselves and see that other people are struggling with things as well, and I've really admired that about them.
Yeah, I think that's a huge lesson that often people learn the hard way. And when you have it built into your family dynamic,
Right.
um, it becomes it's a hard lesson in a different way, but it's less of that arc that a lot of young adults go through, I think. What has Avery taught you and your husband?
A million lessons. I'm not the same person I was before we had him, and I don't think any parent who goes through this can say that they're the same person that they were.
Mhm.
He has taught me that I'm stronger than I ever would have guessed I could be, that I can handle a lot of hard things that I maybe should have gone into a medical career because I now can do every single medical thing that ever.
Nothing phases you anymore, right?
We take him, whenever he's in the hospital, the nurse are just like, just let the mom do it because, I know how to do things with him and I know what he needs. And so, yeah, nothing phases me anymore as far as medical things. I give IVs, I do all the things, but
Oh,
yeah. Well, he has
that's big.
he has a port, so it's not like I place an IV, but he has a port now because of all the UTIs that he's had, and so there a lot of times they'll send IV meds, and we'll just deliver them to him and
Okay.
have the nurse come. It's not like I'm placing the IV. I would never do that, but anyway,
Still.
I would say my husband and I both have become again more aware of our neighbors and the caring community that we live in. That has been such a great gift for us to see that, people really want to help. And maybe I wouldn't have been aware of that had we not had him. There have been various times in our lives when we've really needed to reach out to our community, and they've always been there. And sometimes when we're hesitant to reach out, and they've still always been there. We're really
Yeah.
lucky that we live in a pretty small town. We have great neighbors. We have certain neighbors that and dear friends that we'll drop dinner off just on a whim, thinking I just thought of you today and thought, you might be dealing with some stuff. And it seems to always come on a day when I really was dealing with a lot of things. And I can remember one time when our son was, we tried to be self-sufficient, like
Mhm.
everybody's kind of taught to deal with things on their own and just deal with what you have in front of you. But I think he was probably about 4. We were having a really, really rough time, and it was summertime. I look out the window and I see my friends out there washing my windows. They had just, on a whim, gotten together and decided, let's go do some service. And they came and washed my windows. I didn't know they were coming. I didn't know, what was going on. It was just such a joyful thing. And there've been so many times throughout his life that has happened. And we've also learned gratitude. I think that's been a big thing for us, to be very grateful for the time that we've had with him, for the time that our other children have had with him, for all the people that have had such a big part in his life. And parents of children with disabilities will know that there's a huge community that is there supporting you in the best case scenario. Sometimes you really do feel on your own, but we have really felt that support throughout his life. We've had so many great elementary school teachers and peer tutors again, and just friends and respite care providers and just
Mhm.
angels that have been a big part of our life. And I've kept tried to keep a running count. I think I probably haven't done as well as I should have in the last few years, but sometimes I'll look back through that book and it brings me to tears to just think of all the hundreds and hundreds of, I would say, of people that have had an influence on his life, and that that he's had an influence on their life, because we hear that as well. I looked through his yearbook and so many of his students just said, Avery, you've changed my life,
Oh,
because showed them that, he has no reason to smile. And people would say, why is he so happy? But he's so full of joy. And there were a lot of people who said, I was having a horrible day, and then I got to talk to you, and now I'm not, because you reminded me that my life is pretty good, and that, there are great people like you in the world to make me smile and bring me joy.
I love that. My next question was going to be what has he taught the community?
Yeah.
And that's one of the big things, I think. And perspective is everything. And when
Yeah.
you can have a smile on your face and deal with the things that Avery deals with,
Right.
and somebody else is just dealing with maybe a bad grade or whatever, it sort of just brings you back to reality of what's important in life, right?
I think that definitely in high school, I think that was, for him, that was his role. I think at that school was just to to spread light and joy and to remind people to smile, that life is hard, but you can still find joy no matter your circumstances. Better days will come, and things will get better, or either the situation will get better or your ability to handle that situation will improve, and we've really seen that over the years in our own life. And I think a lot of his friends have. I do have friends who, when they're having a hard day, they just want to come and be with him because there's just a light about him and a joy. And so they'll just say, I really need some Avery time. Can I come over and just hang out with them for a little while? And
That's amazing.
yeah, and he's he I can't express. You should make sure you post a picture, if you have the ability, a picture of his smile, because he does have a smile that just everybody just responds to, because it's just, you can tell it's genuine, and there's just a light of joy in his heart. And we've been really grateful for that. And he's nonverbal, but he expresses so much by his response. He laughs at things, and he moans when he doesn't like things, and responds to certain things that you say to him. And it really has been a joy that way. As far as other things he's taught the community, I think that he's taught them endurance, that you just keep going through your struggles. And maybe that's seeing my husband and I deal with it as well, and our family deal with
Mhm.
it. But we've had people tell us, it's really helped them get through their own struggles, to just remember, keep pushing through it, and things will get better.
Yeah. Well, and that leads me to my next question, which was you mentioned how close you and your husband are. Um, I think sometimes struggles like these pull people apart a lot of times. How is it that you and he have let it bring you closer?
Um, you know, I would say we've worked on that. We do work on making sure that we're focusing on each other.
Mm,
And we talk a lot about things. Since he left work, he goes on every doctor's appointment. There were a lot of years when I would just handle that by myself, and I would take him.
mhm.
We live 2 hours from Salt Lake City, and that's where all his specialists were, in Salt Lake. So we'd have to drive down there and see all the
Yeah.
specialists there. But since he left work, he comes with me, insists on coming with me, even though I'm like, sometimes I would like to just be by myself in the car. But he comes, and really always helpful, because he doesn't want me lifting him by myself, because he's
Mhm.
big now, and it's hard to transfer him sometimes. And so, and we rely on each other, and we have a support system. We have dear friends separate from each other that we rely on as well. And I think that's important. I come from a big family. I'm very close to my siblings, and they've been a huge help to me as well. And so that sort of frees me up, to be able to not rely on my husband for every bit of emotional support that I need, because I think
Right. Yeah.
that would be tough in a relationship. And it's same with him.
Mhm.
He has some dear friends that he can rely on for some emotional support. But we've been together for 40 years almost, and we just keep keep plugging away at it.
Keep on keeping on. And I think that's good advice is to make sure that you've had because we with divorce and blended families, my husband and I have sometimes we've had a lot of ups and downs with that. One of the things he has said to me is, "Can you talk to your sister about that?" Because he's reached a limit of hearing me talk about it. And I think that's the healthiest thing in the world for him to say,
Great.
I've hit a limit on that particular conversation, and I know that you need to continue to get it out of yourself.
Right.
So could you talk to
I
your
just
sister
can't
about that?
fix
I'm like,
it for you. Men like to fix things, and if they can't fix it for you, sometimes they're like, deal with it in a different way, because I can't fix it.
exactly.
It's just
But
making me
having those
sad.
separate people that can be your person outside of your husband, I think is important. When he said that, I was like, he's right. I need to give him a break, especially when it had to do with our blended kids. That's a very sensitive topic, but having those separate support groups that you can sort of unload on when you need to and then come back together and not have that in the midst of the stuff,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Yeah.
been very helpful.
So to wrap us up, what advice would you give to a family who is just embarking on a journey like this?
I would tell them to have courage. It's not easy. I will say it's not. There's going to be things along the way that will feel like are going to break you, but overall you will be so blessed along the way by the people that you come in contact with, by the experiences that you have. You will be a better person. You will feel more fulfilled as a person, because you will know that you've helped give someone a better life that they would not have had otherwise, had you not sacrificed for them. And certainly it's not an easy chore and not an easy job. And my heart aches in sympathy for some of the things that you'll probably have to face along the way. But there's a whole community out there pushing for you to succeed and trying to help you along the way. So don't be afraid to reach out for help when you need it.
I think that's great advice. And one thing I've learned over the struggles of my life is people want to help.
Mhm.
A lot of times we don't want to ask for it, but like you said, they show up at random times just because. And so sometimes I think when you do ask for help, they're grateful to you for saying, "Could you please come help me?" and not feeling like they're intruding. So I
Right,
think, being open to that idea that people want to be there for you if you allow it.
right. That's absolutely true.
So if there's one message that you hope Avery knows about his life as his mother, what would you say to him?
I think he knows that he's very deeply loved, and I don't think
Mm.
he's ever had spent a day in his life when he didn't know that he was deeply, deeply loved. So that's what I would say. He's been a joy. He's our joy.
RaeAnne, thank you so much for sharing this. This is such a personal story, and I know it wasn't necessarily easy, but I think it's very important and I think it's so helpful. And I think that the more we can share things like this, the better off we're all going to be and the more compassionate we all become.
Thank you so much for having me. I was happy to talk about him. Any chance I get, I'm happy to talk about him.
All right. Thank you so much for watching and tune in next time for our next episode of The Gift of the Struggle.
Thank you.